Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. This is an introductory webinar about FileTrain. The purpose of the webinar here is to give you a relatively extensive look at what FileTrain can do and how it operates on a basic level. If you've received the invitation for our winter webinars, you will have seen that there are a number of FileTrain webinars on the agenda, and this is actually a bit of a prerequisites to follow the other ones. We'll be going into much more technical detail in some of these other webinars, building FileTrain installations where there is interaction with XML, there is interaction with databases, and so on. And in order to do that, it's important to have a good understanding of what the application is and what it can do. So this is an introduction webinar. The next one continues the introduction by talking about ways that you can simplify the stations that you're using in FileTrain and explaining a number of more or less organizational issues around FileTrain installations. But that's for the next webinar in the list. This one starts off with the basics. I have a small presentation that I have prepared. It is small, you'll see that, but I thought it was important to at least give you a few slides and give some background here, both on a technical level and on a product or commercial level if you want. So let me go through that, and then as you can see on the agenda after that, there is basically a demo of the product and then a little bit of a wrap-up at the end. Okay, let's get started here. So what is FileTrain and why are we looking at this? FileTrain is an application from a Swedish software developer called Laidback Solutions. The application can be summarized in one sentence if you want. It's an automation application for repetitive tasks. And I've listed a number of different things that FileTrain can automate. In this way, it looks more or less abstract if you want, but you can see that it can actually automate a wide variety of things that typically you would have to do manually. And that includes things like moving files about, deleting files, copying, sending out emails, receiving emails, meaning getting attachments from emails, for example, and processing those attachments, getting and receiving files to FTP servers, but also more advanced things like reading and writing text files, reading and writing XML files. You can connect to databases. There are a number of different databases that are supported, and you can store information in a database or retrieve it from a database. And then there is a list of other applications that are integrated with plugins inside of FileTrain so that those can be automated as well. And you can see a list on there, including things like Kala's PDF Toolbox or Claro Alpical. And then by extension, any application that uses hot folders or can be addressed through a command line, has a command line interface, can also be integrated into a FileTrain station. So it's a wide range of tasks that can be accomplished, and typically FileTrain is used so that things that otherwise would have to be done in a manual way can now be done in a fully automated way. And that saves time, but more importantly, it also standardizes the tasks that are being done, and it saves on errors that people make while automating or while doing those things manually. If you automate, then obviously they are always done in exactly the same way. That sounds like something that should be very expensive, but it is not actually. FileTrain is 2,500 euros, as you can see, plus a software maintenance agreement. That SMA contract or software maintenance agreement contract is 20% of the product price, and it is required for the first year, optional after that, but we see that most customers actually continue the maintenance agreement simply because upgrades and updates are included in that maintenance agreement. And Laidback has a history of releasing frequent updates that solve problems in many cases, but also in many cases add smaller functionality to the application. I say it costs 2,500 euros, minus 10, as you can see. And that's a very simple deal. There are no options. Everything that I will show in the demo is actually also included in that price. So it's not a modular system. You don't have to figure out what exactly you need or want to do. Anything that can be done with FileTrain, including the more advanced functionality such as the database connectivity, is actually included in the application and in the price. So that's pretty straightforward, and I believe for an application like this, if you look at how much time and money this can actually save you, it's also very affordable. It runs on Mac and Windows. The functionality on both platforms is actually very similar, not to say the same. It can also run on Linux. The application is built in Java under the hood. It's not something that you typically need to know, but that means that it can also run on Linux platforms if you would have a need to have that. If it is running on Windows, then it can be used as a regular application, just as on the Mac or on Linux. But if you're running it on Windows, you also have the option to run it as a true Windows service, which means that no one has to be logged into the machine in order to have FileTrain process files. And it runs on any operating system, basically any more or less modern operating system. It does not require a special server version. You don't need to have Windows 2008 or 2012 server to run this. It can be simply XP or Windows 7. It also doesn't require any other special applications or databases or whatever to be installed. It's fully self-contained. Installation is very simple as well. It's a regular installer that you run, and afterwards you have desktop software that you fire up. You make your workflows and you activate them. So it's all very straightforward and very easy to set up and get going with. Let me hide that control panel here, and then we'll switch to FileTrain. So what you see on screen now is the FileTrain application. Like I said, you can run it as a standalone desktop application. That's the only option I have on Mac. On Windows, I could also fire it up as the service, and then I wouldn't see anything. It would just do processing in the background. But if you fire up the desktop application, then this is the first screen that you get to see. On the left-hand side, you have the different categories of information that you have access to, starting with the live view that I have selected right now, which gives you an overview of the stations in here and some other information that I'll come back to. And then I have a configuration section, and you can see analysis, plugins, and support information. And I'll be going over all of this to get you comfortable with what you have available in the application and how it works. The key to understanding FileTrain really is the building blocks for the automated workflows that you have. And those building blocks can be found here. You have stations, sources, filters, and actions. Those are, if you want, the most important parts of FileTrain that you have in here. A station is an automated workflow. So each of these stations that you see in the list here is really an automated workflow that, if I activate it, will perform a number of tasks. What these stations do, the actual tasks that they perform, are being determined by the sources, filters, and actions. And you can see that I have many more actions, filters, and sources than I have stations. So each station in my setup contains a list of different actions, the building blocks that tell it what to do. It's important to understand the structure, and it's very important to understand that each of these building blocks can actually, it's like a Lego box if you want. You can use these building blocks in multiple stations. So if I create an action to connect to a database and store information, I will do that here, for example. I can give that action a name and I can set up its configuration. Once I have created that, I have a little building block that I can now use in any of the stations that I have in my installation. And that same concept is true for actions, filters, and sources. And it's a very important concept because the fact that these actions, filters, and sources are shared in between stations makes it very easy on the one hand, because you can develop something once and then reuse it in a number of automated workflows. But it also carries a danger in it, and you have to be really aware of the fact that these things are in fact reused. If I change an action that is used by 5 different stations, I'm effectively changing the behavior of those 5 stations. So if you have actions that are specific to a particular station, then you should really have a separate copy of that action for each of the stations that it performs. That sounds a little bit weird at first, or unproductional at first, but I can assure you once you start building workflows, if you keep this concept in mind, that it is actually a very productive way of building larger stations out of these smaller building blocks. But you have to be very aware of it, because it's easy, at least at first, to change something and then realize that this particular action was also used somewhere else, and that you've now changed multiple items, and perhaps items that you did not want to change. So it's something to keep very close in the back of your mind. If you want to know where these things are used, you can already see that here. If I make this list a little bit bigger, and I select an action in here, that action has a name and has a type, and we'll look in more detail what that is in a second. But you can see both in the pop-up that appears for an action and actually in the list here for actions that it shows you which stations that particular action is used in. And that's the same for actions, filters, and sources. They will all tell you where in the application they are being used. So if you want to make sure that you're not changing something inadvertently, then you can look in this list and see whether those actions are already used somewhere else. And I have a few of them in here, the ones marked with debug in their name. I have a few of these actions that I did develop for a particular station, but are not used at the moment, and hence the area here for used in station is blank. Those are actions that at the moment are not used in anything. Okay, so that's the basic concept of the application. I have automated workflows called stations. I can build as many of those as I want, and then I build them by using sources, filters, and actions. And we'll be looking at one of those stations to see exactly how that works. What you can see here is that I follow a relatively strict naming convention for all of these items. And if I go into my folder structure for FileTrain, then you'll see that I actually have the same naming convention here. I'll give more information on naming conventions and organizational issues and how you can organize folder structures and stations and actions in the next webinar when we talk about hints and tips to keep your FileTrain optimally running and in good shape. But for now, just remember that I have this list of stations and I have a naming convention in here. And what I'll do is I'll build a very simple station for you that does pre-flight. And while building that station, you'll get an idea of what all of these different building blocks are used for and how it all comes together. Now, in order to do this in a bit of a structured way, I'm going to create a new folder called Webinar Preflight according to PDFX. Let's call it that. And that will be a main folder. And I want to build a station that has a hot folder, so an input folder. And for this example, I'm going to put it as a subfolder of my main station folder here. And I want to have output from my automated workflow, and the output that I expect is good PDF files. And if there's good PDF files, there's probably also bad PDF files, the ones that fail pre-flight. And because I want to automate something, I also want to generate reports. And let's generate PDF and XML reports in there. So I'm just creating a number of folders in a real-world production workflow. I can imagine that this input folder, for example, would be a shared folder, or that it would live on a different server. All of that is possible. I'm just trying to keep things simple in the example I'm building here. So essentially what I want to build here is a station that says, look at the files that come into my input folder, pick them up automatically, pre-flight them, and then dump them into the good PDF or bad PDF files folder, depending on the pre-flight result, and generate me PDF and XML reports so that I can see what is good or not good with them. That's what I want to accomplish. And with that, we go back to FileTrain here. I have a little plus button at the bottom of each of these lists, and obviously that will add an additional element. In this case, I'm looking at stations. So the plus button allows me to add a station, and it gives me a relatively simple looking window, and you can already see the basic building blocks in here. I have a list where I can add sources. I have a list where I can add filters and then actions. So let's start with those sources. And actually, before we go to sources, let's start by giving this thing a name. If we build a station, it's important to have good file names. So let's call this webinar, and we call this pre-flight. So I'll just give it the same name, pre-flight, according to PDFX. I can also have a description in here, which is very useful to do, because if you come back to a station 6 months from now, a description may help you to understand what exactly this is accomplishing. So I can have my description about that in here. I can set activate on application start, which typically in a production workflow is something that you would want. I'm going to switch it off in here because I'm not in production. I'm having a test environment or a building environment if you want. But in a production workflow, you want that if FileTrain starts, that automatically all of the production stations are activated and start processing again. So in a production workflow, you would probably let this be activated. These other two have to do with what information FileTrain actually saves for a station. Remember internal state will cause FileTrain to remember things like variables that are stored in stations or with files. But we'll come back to those concepts a little bit later. And the cache will come back to as well. It can be a very useful concept, but for now, just leave the default values for these, and we'll move down to the sources area here. And in sources, I can now do two things. I can click on the plus again to add a source, and then you can see that there are different types of sources. Or I can make it easy for myself, and I can go to my folder with input. We make that a little smaller. So those folders that I created have that input folder, and I can simply drag that on top of the sources area inside my station. And by doing that, I add a folder source to my FileTrain station. So basically, that is the same as going to plus and then selecting folder and then choosing where the location of that folder is. It's just easier to drag and drop that into the list. What does that input source do? Well, I can click on the configure button here, or I can simply double click on the input source itself, and then it opens the editor for that input source. And you can see it's a folder that is going to be checked. That, of course, has a name by default. If I drag and drop, it takes the name of the folder, and because I have great regard for naming conventions, I'll use the same prefix as I'm using for the station itself, so webinar. And you can see that it automatically now gives me or filled in the full path to that input folder on my disk. The browse button, of course, allows me to change that once I'm done. I can choose whether I want to check only that folder or also subfolders by simply switching on the scan subfolder option in here. What I am going to change is the frequency with which folders are checked. And I'm doing that mainly because I'm building a test workflow here and I want things to be going quick. There are two timers that are together responsible for deciding how quickly a file will be picked up by FileTrain. The first one is the scanning setup, and by default it's set to scan every folder every 15 seconds. Now you can imagine that scanning a folder, it takes some time, and if you have 1,000 folders that you want to scan because you have a lot of stations, then that could actually take a considerable amount of time to run over all of these folders and make sure there is nothing new in there. And that's why you can change that schedule. The default is 15 seconds. For a test setup, I prefer to actually set it to 1 second because then the pickup is almost immediate. But if you are in a production environment, I would look at what that particular station does, and it would not be uncommon to, for example, have 600 seconds, which is 10 minutes. So you have to really look at each station and decide how frequently it has to run, and that determines how frequently FileTrain will now scan that particular input source and pick up files that it finds in there. You can see that you can have very simple frequency setups, but you can already appreciate that there are quite complex things that you can accomplish here as well. So I can say weekly, for example, every week and only on Monday, and let's do this at 6 a.m. So this would be an input source that is checked only once a week on Monday before the start of the working week. A little bit more complex, but very, very useful. I could choose to do this only on Monday, or if it's a cleanup task, I could choose to do it only on working days or only during the weekend. So there's a lot of different ways you can set this up. Again, for the demo, I'm just going to set it to 1 second. That's how most of my testing workflows are built. And then the second number that determines how quickly files are picked up is the safety margin. And that safety margin, I'm also going to change to 1 second. That safety margin determines what the time is between FileTrain seeing a new file arrive in a folder and the moment that it actually starts processing it. And the reason that there is this safety margin is because, especially when you start exchanging files between different operating systems, there is a chance that a file will be written with a size of 0, for example, and that it will be closed by the process that is dealing with it, and then only a few milliseconds later it will open it up again and start writing to it. So different operating systems have different ways to work with files, and the safety margin makes sure to not start using a file before it is actually ready for use. So it's important to have this set at something. And again, for production flows, the 5-second interval is not a bad thing because I'm on a Mac, only on a Mac without external drives or anything like that. It's not going to be a problem to put this at 1 second in here. You can see some other options here. The most important ones are probably the invisible objects and the zero-sized objects that you can ignore. In most normal workflows, you can simply leave all of this to the default values and say OK. So I dragged and dropped this into my station window. I changed the frequency with which that this particular input source is checked, and now we have a station that will automatically monitor a folder for me. How do we tell that station what to do with the files that it finds in that folder? Well, that is done by these filters and actions. So the first thing we need to do is add a filter. You can see that I cannot add an action. Actions are always attached to a particular filter. So the filter is the first thing that I need in here. Because I want to do pre-flights with PDF Toolbox, according to PDFX, I'm talking about PDF files. That's a given. So what I'm going to do here is add a filter, a file filter. And I have two options. I can create a new file filter, or I can go down here to the list of existing filters. So remember the building blocks that I talked about. I've already built filters in this installation of FileTrain. So why would I build a new filter if I already have one that does exactly what I want? So what I can do here is look for something that will filter PDF files, because that is what I need. And I happen to have one like that. I simply select it. And if I now select it in the list, again, I have a configuration button, but I can simply double click on the filter itself as well. And that shows me what the settings are for this particular filter. I could go in and change the name. I could also go in and change what that particular filter actually does. If I don't want to filter on PDF, I can add a different extension. If I want to filter on PDFs, but only PDFs that start with ABC, I can add ABC as a prefix in there, and that will now match only PDF files that start with ABC. But again, be very, very careful about what you're doing. I used an existing filter in my FileTrain installation, and because it's a very generic filter, chances are good that this filter will also be used by other stations. So if I'm changing it, if I'm changing the properties of this filter, I am probably also changing the properties of other stations, because that filter will be used there as well. And remember that you could go to the list of filters and then see what the full list of stations is that actually use that particular filter, if you want to be sure of where it is used. But for now, I'm going to undo the change that I did. I simply wanted to show you that you can add conditions in here to build a filter, and that you can actually include multiple conditions in here. And that you can include conditions not only on the file name, but on a relatively long list of other things as well. And I'll show you two examples. I can filter on file size if I want. I could also filter, just as an example, on PDF version. Because this is PDFs that we are filtering here, it might be useful to say, well, if the PDF version is larger than 1.3, I want to do something special. And you can build a filter that actually accomplishes that. But it shows a wider possibility. It shows the possibility of these filters to use metadata about the files to do the filtering. And that, of course, is a very powerful concept. If I have images, if I have PDF files, then I can filter based on the metadata that is in these files. If I have a file type that supports XMP, I can filter based on the metadata fields in the XMP. And I've added one here that was publication title. So I could say if the publication title is Elle, for example, then you have to do something. So you can really make very, very fine-toothed, very, very precise filters to determine which files you want to work with in this particular station. Okay, let me cancel this so that we go back to the default filter for PDF files. And I've now added that, so I can go back in here and I can go to actions. And the same thing applies here. I can use an action that I already built by going to existing actions and then searching for an action that I've used before or that I've built before. Or I can build my own action for this particular workflow. And because this is a demo, I'm going to build one from scratch. And what I will build, you can see the list here. I'll talk about that a little bit more very soon, but for now I am looking for where PDF Toolbox is, and for some reason I'm overlooking it here. This is a PDF toolbox action, and again I'm going to be doing the same thing. I will give this a good name that fits with the name of the station that I'm building, and I'll call it pre-flight with the PDFX 1A profile. This action uses PDF Toolbox. Now, how does FileTrain know where PDF Toolbox is and whether I have PDF Toolbox on this system? Before I complete this action, I'm just going to OK this. It's not fully set up, but that's OK. I'm going to OK this station as well for now, and you'll see that appear in the list, because we need to understand where FileTrain finds PDF Toolbox. In order to see that, I need to go to Configuration on the left-hand side and look at External Tools. In the list of external tools, one of those is Calas PDF Toolbox, and you can see that it actually found it. There is the path to the PDF Toolbox executable here. You can see that it found PDF Toolbox, and my PDF Toolbox version is 7.5. So that looks good. So in this configuration setting for the external tools, I can specify where PDF Toolbox lives, and I can also specify two additional folders, a folder with profiles, and that is one of the folders. If I move up one level here, that is a folder with resources that I've created for that purpose. So I've set that profile folder to that folder that I've created, and where I put a number of Calas PDF Toolbox profiles in. And then I have a temporary folder, and that temporary folder is for PDF Toolbox to use to store temporary results. I don't have to complete this. If I don't, then it will simply use the system temp folder, which is fine in most cases. In some cases, if you have a fast hard disk, for example, or you don't want PDF Toolbox to use the system drive, then you can simply use the browse button here to specify another drive or a specific folder on the system where you want to store these things. But it's a temporary folder, so normally it's automatically cleaned by PDF Toolbox once the information is no longer needed. So this is where FileTrain knows where to find PDF Toolbox, and that is why if we go back to our stations and I reopen that and I double click on the action that I have in here, that is why if I go to Profile, I can now see a list of profiles in there. And I happen to have a PDFX1A profile in here, so I'm going to select that one. And that basically tells FileTrain that whenever a file is picked up and it's a PDF file, to send that PDF file to PDF Toolbox for further processing, and to use the convert to PDFX1A ISO-coded profile to do that processing with. So that is the profile that is going to be used to examine that, that file that was found there. And then you can see a range of other options. And remember what I said in the beginning, I want good files to go in one folder, bad files to go into another folder, and then I also want to generate reports. And luckily, I have a section here that is called Results, and I have a section called Reports. So I'm guessing that we're going to need both of those. Let's start with Results. The plugin that FileTrain has for PDF Toolbox has a very easy setup for the resulting files that come out of PDF Toolbox. It says at success, so if everything goes well during pre-flight, do this with the output file. And on the other side, if there is an error, then put it somewhere else. So I have two paths that I can specify, and I'll just go in and click Browse, and I am then able to specify the good files if my Mac wants to cooperate for a second. There we go. So if I go here and I select the good file folder, I can simply put that in, and then either I use Browse on the other one as well, or I can even simply say I know it's called bad PDF files, and put it in like that. So now I have an output path if everything goes well, and I have an output path if something goes wrong. And what will be stored in here is the result of the pre-flight, right? Now, this is the easy setup. I'm not going to spend much time on it. I will show it next webinar, but there is also an advanced setup, because PDF Toolbox can be much more fine-grained when it comes when we talk about results. You can specify in much more detail what has happened. Are there errors? Are there warnings? Are there informational messages? Were any fixes done to the PDF file or not? So you have a much wider list of options that you have, and the plugin for PDF Toolbox allows you to specify all that. But for now, I'm happy with the easy setup. If we go to reports, then it's the same very easy and straightforward setup. I can choose the language for my reports, and these are the report languages supported by PDF Toolbox. So I could set this to French or German, for example. And then I can add the report that I want. And you can see that I can add many reports. PDF Toolbox is kind of neat in the sense that if you do pre-flight, you can generate as many reports as you want. The pre-flight is done once, and then the result is reused to generate those different reports. So what I'll do here is I'll say I always want a report. I want a report with comments. You can see that there are many different types that you can generate, but the PDF with comments is a PDF report with annotations on top of it. I want to include an overview. I want the annotations to be on a low-res version of the incoming file, and then I can specify where to generate that report. And we'll do the same thing. We'll say, put these in the reports folder. I can specify a subfolder in there if I want. So I could say, well, if it's a PDF report, put it in the PDF subfolder. That folder will automatically be created inside my reports folder now. And I can specify a file name. And I actually don't like log in there. I like report much better. But you can see that there is this weird %f% item in there. And while I will not be talking too much about this right now, you should realize and know that FileTrain supports what they call macros. And a macro is very similar to what you would use in Excel, for example, when you're doing calculations. A macro is something that is dynamically changed whenever PDF Toolbox in this case and FileTrain processes a file. So if my input file is called test.pdf, then the %f% part will be replaced by test. And my report in this case will be called test_report.pdf. So this is one report that I want, but I said I want two reports, and I'm simply going to set this to XML, and we'll use the same folder, but I'm going to put the XML reports in a subfolder called XML, and then instead of having this, because this is not good, I'm simply going to use the same name as the incoming file and add an XML extension. And for both actually, and I should go back to the other one and do this as well. For both, I'm going to request an override if the report already exists. You can choose what you want there, but for now, I'm going to set it up that way. So we've added two reports. We've specified what should be done with the resulting files in here, and the rest of the options for now, we're just going to leave as is. There is an apply fixes option that says, do you want to apply the fixes in the profile that you've selected, yes or no? Yes, I want that in this case. So I'm simply going to say OK. Now this station is almost functional. The only thing that I'm missing is what should happen with the original files. And to do things well, I'll create an additional subfolder in here called originals. And I will also add another action, and I'm going to use a move action, which is here. And that move action, I'll give a name, move originals. And you can see that the move action by default says move the default file. And this is also a very important concept in FileTrain. We're building a station. That station has an input source, and PDF files are picked up from that input source. And then this filter here determines that, yes, we're looking for PDFs. So any PDF coming from that input source is picked up by that filter and is sent to all actions that are attached to it. But the original file remains in that input folder up until the moment where I decide what I want to do with it. And what I'm going to do with it here is move it to a different folder, and that's why I'm using a move action, and I have it set to the default. So this is the default file that was picked up by the station. And now I can decide where I want to store it, and I'm going to say originals, overwrite, and that's all I want. I don't want to change the name. I could, but I'm not going to do that right now. And I simply say OK. So what will happen now? The first action is that pre-flight. That will give me a resulting file in one of those output folders. And then the second action is that the original file that was pre-flighted is now going to be moved to another folder. That's the two actions connected to this station. Now let me OK that. You can see that there is a little red icon in front of the station. I can say start station, and then we'll see that it becomes green. And once that is the case, we now have a workflow that will scan that input folder that we have here, and that will automatically pre-flight files that go through it. So let me open these up so that we can see what happens, and let's see whether we built this correctly from the first time. A folder with some PDF files in it, and if I grab some files and copy them into my input folder, we'll see what happens. So the first thing that you notice is that in that report folder, it actually automatically created a PDF and an XML subfolder like I predicted. And then if I open these up, you'll see that the XML version of the pre-flight report appears in the XML subfolder, and these are the annotation reports for PDF Toolbox. So this is the pre-flight report in PDF, and this is the pre-flight report in XML. My files were put in the good PDF files folder in this instance. Why? Well, the profile I'm using is a Convert to PDF X1A, which is a pretty liberal open profile. So PDF Toolbox could correct everything I dropped in that input folder. So the result is good, and the files end up in the good files folder. The original files that have not been changed have been moved into my originals folder, and so I have everything that I wanted to do. As you could see, not very complicated. I have an input source. In that input source, specify what I want to do with the PDF files, and then I attach a number of actions to that. Now, there is a few other things that need to be said about this, of course. This is a very easy example, but of course you can make it a little bit more complex. And one of the most common ways to make it more complex or more powerful, because that's the same thing in this case, is by having multiple filters. This only picks up PDF files from that input folder. So what happens if I have a JPEG image that I drop in there? Well, right now, the way I built the station, nothing is going to happen. It's simply going to remain in that input folder. If you also want to process JPEG files, then I can either change this filter if I want to do the same thing with PDF and JPEG, or if I want to do something different, I could say, I'm going to add a filter. Let's see if we have a filter that, well, let's take the PNG files filter. It's almost the same example. Quickly open that and show you that that now filters out on a different extension, PNG. And now I can add different actions for PNG files. So I could, in my folder for that station, let me close these things up and tidy up a little bit. So in my folder structure here, I could say, well, if someone sends me PNG files, then I simply want to store them in a folder and not bother with them. Well, store them means action, move. We call that webinar move PNG files. The default file, because it's the file that is coming in, and then just as I did before, I set the location that came in. And I don't have to change the name in any way, shape, or form. I can just leave it like this, say overwrite if duplicate, and there we go. So if I now drop a PNG file in my input folder, instead of being pre-flighted by PDF Toolbox, it will be moved into the PNG file folder and handled that way. What if I want to send an email to someone to say, well, there are files in here that I don't recognize? Well, I can simply add an email action, and email send is what I'm looking for, and that gives you an action for sending out an email. So again, I can give that a name that fits my station. Send warning email. I can select the SMTP server to use, and that SMTP server is also something that is set up in the configuration area, just as the link with PDF Toolbox was. And then I can define where to send it, perhaps who to copy on that, what the subject is, and what the email body is. And you can see that all of these fields are actually yellow fields. And a yellow field in a yellow edit field in FileTrain means that you can use macros. And that means that I can do something like warning unrecognized file type, and that would be just a fixed subject for the email that I sent out. But if I want to include the name of the original file, I can say file name, and then I can use one of those macros that we've seen in the report section as well. And when FileTrain now sends out the email, it will replace this %f% by the name of the file that it picked up. In our case, the name of the PNG file. So we're just I'm not going to complete this totally. I could, as you can see, have a custom email body. I can attach the file in question. I'm just going to leave it like this. The only thing I'm going to do is move my send email up a notch in my filter lists. So if a PNG file is found, this action will be run to send out a warning email, and then the next action will be run to move that PNG file to my archive folder. That gives us a pretty good understanding of what you can do with a station. The rest of the complexity of FileTrain, and again power of FileTrain, is caused by the fact that, of course, you don't only have the ability to use one input source. You can have multiple folders that you can check, but there is also multiple different types of input sources. And the same goes with filters and with actions. You can build different types of sources, different types of actions. If I look at the sources, what we used so far is the folder source. Check a particular folder, pick up files from that folder, and process them. Done. I have a multi-folder, which gives me the ability to specify a whole range of different folders and then process files from there. But that's essentially the same as the folder option by itself. So these are very, very similar. But the email, FTP, and timer are very different. If I create an email source, then I can have FileTrain connect to an email server, automatically download emails, and do something with those emails. And you can see that I can connect to a POP3 or an IMAP server, and every email that is downloaded can now be handled by filters and actions connected to the station. If a file is attached to that email, the file can be handled. So if someone sends me a PDF file, I can now set this up in such a way that that PDF file is automatically retrieved from the email server, and then it's pre-flighted, and same way as what we did now, the result is put in different folders. So that's the email input source, and the FTP input source is of course very similar. Instead of checking a folder on my computer or a networked computer, this will actually check an FTP server. Again, you have a lot of different options on how to connect to that FTP server. And you have the same options here, which folder on the FTP server you want to check, Do you want to scan subfolders? What is the frequency with which you want to check that? So the same kind of setup you had for a regular hot folder, you now also have for FTP. And of course, you can have these three types of input at the same time. I could make a station that checks a hot folder, but at the same time also checks an email account and also checks one or multiple FTP accounts. And the result will be that a file will come in from any of those different input sources, and it will, if it's a PDF file, will be handled by these actions set up in the station. If it's a PNG file, it will be handled by some of the other actions that I've defined here. And then the last one I'm just going to show as well, because it can be a very useful one, is a very special one as well. It's a timer. So in this case, it's not an email or a file that triggers the fact that the station starts doing something. It really just is a timer. This is a station that is automatically triggered once every 300 seconds in this example, but I again have all of the same options to configure this. So I could say I'm going to build an automatic archive station that is going to run over a number of folders and look at files and automatically move them to an archival location. And I want to do that not on Mondays because people are working. I want to do that on Saturday, and I want to do it in the evening. So let's say 11 p.m. on a Saturday, because I know nobody will be working at that point. That will simply trigger the station to do things, and I can then add a number of actions to my station that determine what you want to happen at that particular time of the day. That could be moving files around, it could be generating reports from a database, any of those types of things. So that's the first level of flexibility that a station gives you, the capability to use multiple input sources. The second level of flexibility we already talked about a little bit. That's the capability of having these very flexible filters that you can build with multiple conditions and so on. And then not only can you build filters based on a file name, but I can also build filters based on a folder name. When I'm checking emails, I can actually check properties of the email that comes in and filter on that, perhaps to weed out spam or something like that. And then I have some more specialized filters like a timer and a miscellaneous filter, and that is a more advanced topic that we'll come back to in a later webinar. But you have the same flexibility of being able to build different types of filters and to be able to use different filters in the same station. And then, of course, the biggest flexibility, if you want, comes out of the fact that there is this long list of actions that come with FileTrain that you can use. If you run across the list, most of them are actually quite easy to understand. There are a number of actions that link to third-party applications. Add point is one of them. All of these cargo actions are part of that category. The Quark Express one is that way. Feedback is the same. LPCal Claro and Calas PDF Toolbox. All of those link to external applications and automate that external application. Then I have a number of actions to work with files. Copy, we've already used move. There is a delete action to simply delete a file. So those do things with files and allow me to send files in different directions. I have the same functionality for emails, doing stuff with emails, and then giving feedback with FTP send and email send, so send out an email or move a file to an FTP server. And then there are a few more advanced ones, and those advanced actions are the topic of their own webinar, actually. And the major ones are text file, and I'll show you what it looks like. A text file allows you to write out a text file on the fly, and this can be very useful. There are a lot of tools, and PDF Toolbox is a good example. There are a lot of tools that use text-based configuration files. Well, this action here allows you to write such a configuration file to disk dynamically as part of a station. And because this is a yellow field in here, you can see that you can use these variables or macros, as they're called, in here, and that the content of that text file that you write out is really a variable thing. And that's a very powerful concept, and we'll see that come back in some of the more advanced examples in a later webinar. And the other advanced action that we'll talk quite a bit about in an upcoming webinar is the database action. And again, I'll just show you what it looks like. And here I can connect to a number of different database types. I have all the connection details here, and then I have the ability to say, well, what do you want to do with that database? And FileTrain is capable of working with stored procedures and stored functions, or simply run a bunch of SQL code against the database. And this very simple looking action allows you to gather a bunch of information in a station and then send it to a database to store it there, or it allows you to do a database query and get information out of the database. And we'll see extensive examples of that in not the next webinar, but the one after that, when we talk about pre-flight analysis and how can you see which pre-flight errors occur the most in a production workflow, and where I show you an example of such a station that does that. In summary, you have an application here where you can build stations, and each station you should think of as an automated workflow. And that workflow can get input from folders, hot folders. It can check FTP servers, it can check email servers, or it can be triggered by a timer. And once it is triggered, either by a timer or because a file appears, that station then has the ability to work with a number of different filters and different actions. And the stations can be relatively simple. This is an example of creating a zip file. Very, very simple. Input, action. Or they can be relatively complex. Here too, I only have one input source, but I have actually 4 different filters in here that do something to the files that they process. I have another example here with 2 input filters, one for PDF documents and one for XML documents. And again, you see a number of actions. And under the hood, these are actually quite complicated actions. So a station can vary from something that is very simple or to something that is relatively complex. But in essence, each of these stations performs an automated task for you. With FileTrain, you can build as many of these as you want. There is no limit to the amount of stations that you can build, and you simply activate the ones that you want to work with. You can build as many sources, filters, and actions as you want, and as you've seen, those are the real building blocks here. Those sources, filters, and actions are what you build a station from. That's what actually determines what is going to happen in the automated workflow. Then you have a number of other configuration settings here. I briefly mentioned the SMTP servers when you're trying to send out email. There is some setup specific for XMP and IPTC metadata, and there is some setup specific to external tools, where you link some of these external tools. You specify what the path is to some of the external tools that FileTrain can use. And that gives you an overview of what you can do. Now, what we haven't done is gone into a lot of detail for some of these example stations, but that was not my purpose today. My purpose today was to show you conceptually how FileTrain works and give you the tools that if you download a demo version of FileTrain, and you can do that either from the 4Ps website or from the Laidback Solutions website. If you download a trial version, what you've heard in this webinar should give you the understanding of how this works on a conceptual level and let you play around with stations and build stations a lot easier. Because once you understand what the structure is, the application by itself is actually not that difficult to get to get going with. The next webinar, I'm going to stop it here because I'm already a little bit over my time slot of an hour. The next webinar that we'll do for FileTrain will look at some of the, not so much look at the more complex actions. It will look at how can I build complex stations that do a lot of work but are still easy to understand and are nicely condensed into one station. How do I maintain this installation? How do I create backups? Where do I find logs when I'm processing things? So tips and tricks, if you want, to work with FileTrain and understand how you can keep your installation well behaved. And then the webinars beyond that in this winter series, I believe there is one on December 23rd, a few days before Christmas, and then we have one a few days before New Year as well. Those two webinars really focus on more advanced things inside of FileTrain. If you are interested in FileTrain and getting to know more, I would advise you to either follow the other webinars that we're going to do, because we'll actually go into a lot more detail on specific use cases of what can be accomplished, or I would urge you to go to either our website or the Laidback Solutions website, and on that site you have the ability to download FileTrain, and that's a trial version that is fully functional for 30 days, and that will allow you to test out what you can do with the application. Don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We can also jump on a GoToMeeting session and show you something in more detail, or if you have a quick question, we can answer that through email as well. That is the end of what I wanted to show. Thank you to join in on this FileTrain webinar. I hope it's made it clear what kinds of tasks you could do with FileTrain and how powerful it can be. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you back on the other webinars about FileTrain. Those should be a lot of fun as well, because, like I said, it's about more practical cases in general. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there, and I wish you a very nice rest of your evening or your day.